The brass bell above the door let out a tired chime as Victoria Hayes pushed through the entrance of Riverside Pawn and Loan. She moved carefully, her steps measured and deliberate, one hand gripping a worn leather folder while the other steadied herself against the doorframe. The shop smelled of old furniture polish, dust, and decades of forgotten dreams. Shelves lined every wall, crammed with guitars missing strings, tarnished silverware, ancient televisions, and jewelry that once meant something to someone. In the back corner, partially hidden behind a rack of winter coats nobody wanted, sat her grandmother's upright piano. Victoria had brought it here 6 months ago when the medical bills started piling up faster than she could count them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Victoria had called ahead that morning, her voice shaking as she explained to whoever answered that she needed to sell the piano outright. Not pawn it anymore. Sell it completely. The woman on the phone had been curt, telling her the owner would be in after lunch and to come by around 2 o'clock. Now it was 10 minutes past 2, and Victoria stood in the cluttered shop waiting for someone to acknowledge her presence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made the whole place feel like a tomb for abandoned possessions. A man emerged from a back office, wiping his hands on a rag that might have once been white but was now the color of old dishwater. Leonard Briggs was in his late 50s, thick around the middle, with a comb over that fooled nobody and a permanent scowl etched into his features. He had owned Riverside Pawn for 30 years and prided himself on knowing the true value of everything that came through his doors. More importantly, he prided himself on paying as little as possible for it. Leonard barely glanced at Victoria as he tossed the rag onto the counter. She looked to be in her early 40s, dressed in clothes that were clean but obviously worn thin from too many washings. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. Leonard had seen 1,000 people just like her walk through his door. Desperate. Broke. Willing to part with family heirlooms for a fraction of what they were worth. These were his favorite customers because they had no leverage and he had all the power. Victoria approached the counter with as much dignity as she could muster. She had been a high school music teacher for 18 years before the diagnosis. Stage 3 breast cancer, the doctor had said, as if you were commenting on the weather. That was 14 months ago. The treatment had been brutal. Chemotherapy that left her so weak she could barely stand. Radiation that burned her skin. Surgery that left scars she still could not look at without crying. She had burned through her savings in the first 6 months. Her insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Never enough. The experimental treatments her oncologist recommended were not covered at all, but they offered hope when the standard protocols failed. Hope cost money. More money than a former music teacher had. Leonard looked her up and down with barely concealed contempt. He recognized her vaguely from her previous visits when she had pawned the piano initially. Back then she had seemed healthier, less defeated. Now she looked like someone barely holding on. He gestured toward the back corner where the piano sat collecting dust. That old thing's still here. Figured you'd let the pawn ticket expire and I'd own it by now. Saved me the trouble of this conversation. Victoria swallowed hard. She had practiced what she would say during the entire bus ride over, but Leonard's immediate hostility threw her off balance. I called this morning about selling it. Not the pawn arrangement anymore. I need to sell it outright. She tried to keep her voice steady and businesslike, but it wavered slightly on the last words. Leonard snorted and walked past her toward the piano. He did not move with any sense of urgency. Victoria followed him, her hands clutching the leather folder tighter. Inside were the documents she had brought. The original receipt from when her grandmother purchased the piano in 1962. Letters of authenticity. Photographs of her grandmother performing. Certificates from piano competitions her grandmother had won decades ago. Victoria had spent hours gathering everything she could find, hoping it would prove the instrument's value. The piano was a Steinway upright, built in 1961. The cabinet was made of rich mahogany that had been lovingly maintained for decades until Victoria's circumstances made such care impossible. It stood nearly 4 feet tall, with ornate carved details along the legs and music stand. The keys were real ivory, yellowed slightly with age but still functional. The internal mechanisms had been serviced regularly for 50 years before falling into disrepair during the last few difficult months. Despite the dust and neglect, the piano still possessed an undeniable elegance. It was the kind of instrument that belonged in a concert hall or a music conservatory, not hidden in the back corner of a pawnshop behind unwanted winter coats. Leonard walked around the piano slowly, making a show of inspecting it. He ran his finger along the top and looked at the dust he collected with exaggerated disgust. He opened the lid and peered at the strings and hammers inside, shaking his head as if he saw nothing but problems. He pressed a few keys randomly, not bothering to listen to the tone or resonance, just making noise. Victoria watched him, her jaw clenched. She knew what he was doing. Devaluing it. Making her think it was worthless so she would accept whatever insulting offer he made. After several minutes of this performance, Leonard turned to face her. His expression was one of barely tolerant amusement, like a parent dealing with a child who thinks their crayon drawing is worth money. "Look, lady, I'll be straight with you because I'm a nice guy. This piano is a piece of junk. It's old, it's out of tune, it takes up valuable floor space, and I've got no buyer for something like this. Pianos are a dime a dozen these days. Everybody's grandmother had one, and now everybody's trying to unload them because nobody learns to play anymore. Kids these days want video games, not piano lessons." Victoria felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. That's a 1961 Steinway. It's not just any piano. It's a quality instrument that's been maintained its entire life until recently. My grandmother was a professional pianist. She performed all over the state. That piano has historical value beyond just being an old instrument. She held out the leather folder. I brought documentation. Certificates, photographs, the original purchase receipt showing what she paid for it. Leonard did not even look at the folder. He waved it away dismissively. "I don't care if Beethoven himself played this thing. The market for used pianos is dead. You know how much it costs to move a piano? You know how much space it takes up? You know how hard it is to find someone who actually wants to buy an old upright when they can get a digital keyboard for $200 that never needs tuning? This thing is worth maybe $300 to me, and that's being generous. I'm doing you a favor even making an offer. $300. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She had paid Leonard $500 6 months ago just to get the piano out of pawn. The original loan had been for $800, and with interest and fees, it had grown to $1,200. She had scraped together every penny she could to pay it off and reclaim the piano, thinking she might be able to sell it privately for what it was actually worth. But she had run out of time. The next round of treatment started in 5 days, and the hospital required payment up front. She needed at least $5,000 immediately, and she had been hoping the piano might get her halfway there. $300 was an insult. It was a joke. It was nothing. "The piano is worth at least $8,000, Victoria said, her voice shaking now with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Any reputable dealer would tell you that. A Steinway in this condition, even needing some restoration work, is worth thousands. You know that. You're just trying to take advantage of someone in a difficult situation." Leonard's expression hardened. His fake pleasantness evaporated completely. "Listen here. You came into my shop. You're trying to sell me something I don't even want. I'm running a business, not a charity. If you think this pile of wood and wire is worth $8,000, then go find someone willing to pay that. But you won't. Because nobody wants it. That's why you're here begging me to take it off your hands. So don't stand there and accuse me of taking advantage when I'm the only one offering you anything at all." Victoria felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of this cruel man who clearly enjoyed watching people suffer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She had known this would be difficult, but she had not anticipated this level of contempt. Leonard was not just trying to get a good deal. He was actively trying to humiliate her. My grandmother bought this piano when she was 23 years old, Victoria said quietly. She saved for 2 years to afford it. She taught piano lessons out of her home for 40 years. She performed at churches, schools, community events. She played at my parents' wedding. She taught me to play on this instrument when I was 6 years old. Every important moment of my musical life happened at this piano. And now I have to sell it because I'm sick and I need money for treatment, and you're standing here telling me it's worth $300 like it's garbage. Leonard shrugged, unmoved by her story. Sentimental value doesn't pay my rent. Your sob story doesn't change the market value of used furniture, which is what this is. Old furniture that nobody wants. You can get emotional about it all you like, but emotions don't change facts. $300. Take it or leave it. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but Leonard cut her off. And before you start crying about how unfair life is, let me tell you something. I see people like you every single day. People who made bad choices, didn't plan for the future, didn't save money, and now they're in trouble and they want someone else to solve their problems. You think your situation is special? You think you're the only person who ever got sick or had medical bills? I've been in this business for 30 years. I've heard every story there is. Medical bills. Divorce. Job loss. Dead relatives. Gambling debts. Drug problems. Everybody's got a reason why they're broke and why I should pay more than something is worth. But I didn't cause your problems, and I'm not responsible for fixing them. The cruelty of his words took Victoria's breath away. She had spent 14 months fighting for her life. Enduring treatments that made her wish for death. Losing her hair, her strength, her sense of self. Watching her savings disappear. Selling everything of value she owned just to stay alive a little longer. And now this man was telling her it was her own fault for not planning better. As if anyone could plan for cancer. As if anyone could prepare for the way illness devoured not just your body but your entire existence. You're a heartless man, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. I hope you never have to know what it's like to be desperate. I hope you never have to sell something precious just to survive. Because if you do, I hope someone treats you with more compassion than you're showing me right now. Leonard laughed. Actually laughed. A harsh, mocking sound that echoed through the cluttered shop. Compassion doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart. You want compassion, go to church. You want to sell a piano, you deal with the real world. And in the real world, your grandmother's old piano is worth $300. That's my final offer. You've got 60 seconds to decide before I withdraw the offer entirely and tell you to get that thing out of my store. Victoria stared at him, her mind racing. $300 would not even cover 1 week of medication. It would not pay for gas to get to her treatments. It would not buy groceries. It was nothing. But it was something. And something was more than nothing. She thought about her grandmother, about the countless hours spent at that piano, about the music that had filled her childhood home. She thought about the day her grandmother had told her the piano would be hers someday, that it would stay in the family, that it would be passed down through generations. That promise was about to be broken for $300. Before Victoria could answer, Leonard glanced at his watch impatiently. Time's up. Actually, you know what? I changed my mind. $250. That's what I'll give you. $250 and not a penny more. You wasted my time with your life story and your folder full of papers nobody cares about, so now the price went down. $250 for the piano, and you pay the moving costs when I find a buyer. Something inside Victoria broke. Not the kind of breaking that leads to tears or collapse, but the kind that leads to fury. Pure, clean, righteous anger that burned away the desperation and fear and replaced it with clarity. She had spent 14 months being poked, prodded, poisoned, and cut open. She had endured more pain than this small, petty man could possibly imagine. She had faced her own mortality and come out the other side still fighting. And she was not going to let Leonard Briggs treat her like garbage. Victoria set her leather folder down on top of the piano. She unbuttoned her coat and laid it carefully across the bench. Then she sat down at the piano for the first time in over a year. Her hands trembled slightly as she positioned them over the keys. She had not played since before the surgery, since before the chemotherapy destroyed her strength and coordination. She did not know if her fingers would remember what to do. She did not know if the piano, neglected and out of tune, would even sound decent. But none of that mattered anymore. Leonard watched her with confusion that quickly turned to irritation. "What do you think you're doing? Get away from there. You can't just play the merchandise. This isn't a music store." Victoria ignored him. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The piece she chose was Clair de Lune by Debussy. It had been her grandmother's favorite, the piece she had played at every important occasion. The opening notes drifted through the pawnshop, soft and ethereal, like moonlight made audible. Despite being out of tune, despite the dusty strings and stiff hammers, the piano sang. Victoria's fingers moved across the keys with muscle memory that transcended time and illness and neglect. The music swelled and ebbed, painting pictures of night gardens and silver reflections on water. Every note carried 14 months of pain, fear, hope, and defiance. Leonard stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. He had expected her to bang out chopsticks or some other simple tune, something to make a pathetic point about sentimental attachment. He had not expected this. Real music. Beautiful, heartbreaking, professional music that transformed the dingy pawnshop into something else entirely. The other customers in the store stopped what they were doing. A young man looking at power tools set down the drill he was examining. An elderly woman browsing jewelry turned toward the sound. Even the teenage employee Leonard had working the counter came out from behind it to see who was playing. Victoria played the entire piece without stopping. Her hands moved with confidence and grace that came from decades of practice and genuine love for the music. When she reached the climactic section, her playing grew stronger, more passionate, filling every corner of the shop with sound. The piano responded despite its condition, proving that quality instruments retain their voice even when neglected. As Victoria played the final, gentle notes and let them fade into silence, she kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, holding on to the feeling of being whole again. Being herself again. Being more than just a sick woman begging for mercy. When she finally opened her eyes and turned to face Leonard, the shop was completely silent. Everyone was staring at her. The young man with the power tools had tears on his cheeks. The elderly woman was clutching her purse to her chest with a look of wonder on her face. The teenage employee was recording on his phone, having captured at least part of the performance. And Leonard Briggs looked like someone had slapped him across the face. Victoria stood up from the bench slowly, picked up her coat, and retrieved her leather folder. She walked back to where Leonard stood and looked him directly in the eyes. "That piano," she said calmly, "is worth considerably more than $250. It's a professional-grade instrument that has been loved and maintained by someone who understood its value. What you just heard is what this piano can do in the hands of someone who knows how to play it. Now, you have two choices. You can give me a fair price for it, or I can walk out of here and find someone who will. But either way, you will never speak to me with that kind of disrespect again." Leonard's face had gone through several shades of red during Victoria's speech. His mouth worked soundlessly for a moment as he struggled between his natural instinct to dig in his heels and the sudden realization that he had badly miscalculated. The other customers were watching him now, waiting to see what he would do. The teenager was still recording. Leonard was acutely aware that his response in this moment would define how these people saw him. He had built his reputation on being tough, on never backing down, on always getting the better end of every deal. But something about the way Victoria was looking at him made that reputation feel suddenly hollow and ugly. The truth was that Leonard Briggs was not actually a heartless man, though he had worked hard to convince himself and others that he was. He had started this business 30 years ago after his own series of hardships. A divorce that had cleaned him out financially. A bankruptcy that had destroyed his credit. Years of scratching and clawing his way back to solvency by being harder and tougher than everyone else. Somewhere along the way, he had confused being businesslike with being cruel. He had convinced himself that showing empathy was weakness, that every transaction was a battle, that the world was divided into winners and losers and the only thing that mattered was which side you were on. But watching Victoria play, hearing that music emerge from an instrument he had dismissed as junk, seeing the raw emotion and skill and beauty she had created, something shifted in him. "How long have you been playing?" Leonard asked quietly. The question surprised everyone, including himself. Victoria studied him warily, unsure if this was another trap. "Since I was 6 years old. My grandmother taught me. I studied music education in college, got my degree, taught high school orchestra and piano for 18 years before I got sick." "And you can't teach anymore? Because of the illness?" Victoria shook her head. "The treatments were too demanding. I couldn't maintain a schedule. I had to resign." She paused, then added, "I'm hoping when I'm fully recovered I can go back to it. Teaching music was the best job I ever had." Leonard walked over to the piano and ran his hand across its surface again, but this time the gesture was different. Not dismissive or contemptuous, but thoughtful. Almost reverent. "I had a piano teacher when I was a kid," he said. "Mrs. Henderson. Lived 3 houses down from us. My mother made me take lessons every Tuesday after school for 5 years. I hated it. Thought it was a waste of time. Wanted to be outside playing baseball instead." He smiled slightly, a real smile, not the cruel smirk from earlier. "Mrs. Henderson died when I was 16. Heart attack. After the funeral, I walked past her house and heard someone playing her piano. It was her daughter, playing the same pieces Mrs. Henderson used to play. I stood outside listening for almost an hour. First time I understood what all those lessons had been trying to teach me." Victoria said nothing, letting him work through whatever he was processing. The other customers had slowly returned to their browsing, though they kept glancing over to see what would happen next. Leonard turned back to Victoria. "That piece you just played. What was it?" "Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy. It means moonlight. My grandmother used to say it sounded like remembering something beautiful that happened a long time ago." "That's exactly what it sounds like," Leonard agreed. He was quiet for another moment, then sighed heavily. "Look, I'm going to be honest with you. I deal in volume here. I buy low, sell high, turn things over fast. That's how pawn shops work. Pianos are tough because they're big, expensive to move, and the market really is weak right now. Most people who want a piano buy digital. That's not me being mean. That's just facts. But this piano, after hearing you play it, I can tell it's not just any piano. It's special. And you're right. I was being unfair. I was being cruel, actually. You didn't deserve that." Victoria felt her guard lowering slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. She had been burned too many times to trust sudden changes of heart. "I can't give you $8,000, Leonard continued. "I don't have that kind of cash on hand, and I genuinely don't know if I could sell it for that much. But I know a guy. Collector, dealer in antique instruments. He's got connections with music schools, private collectors, people who appreciate this kind of thing. If you're willing to wait a few days, I can reach out to him. He might be interested. If he is, he'll give you a fair price. A real fair price, not pawnshop prices." "Why would you do that?" Victoria asked suspiciously. "What's in it for you?" Leonard shrugged. "Honestly? Maybe I'm tired of being the villain in everyone's story. Maybe hearing you play reminded me that there are things in this world worth more than the bottom line. Or maybe I just don't want that kid's video of me being a jerk to go viral on the internet." He gestured toward the teenage employee, who looked guilty and quickly pocketed his phone. Probably a combination of all three. Victoria considered this. She did not have a few days. Her treatment started in 5 days, and the hospital would not begin without payment. But she also did not have any other options. $300 would not save her. Neither would $250. If there was even a chance that Leonard's contact could offer real money, she had to take it. "I need the money within 4 days," Victoria said. "I have a treatment scheduled, and I need to pay for it up front. If your contact isn't interested or can't move that fast, I'll need to find another solution." Leonard nodded. "I'll call him tonight. He lives about 2 hours from here, but he travels around looking at instruments all the time. If he's interested, he can probably be here tomorrow or the day after. In the meantime, the piano stays here, but I'm going to move it up front where people can see it properly. And I'm going to put a sign on it. Not for sale. Under consideration by serious buyer. That way nobody else tries to lowball you while we're waiting." The gesture surprised Victoria. It was such a small thing, but it represented a complete reversal from how Leonard had treated her just 20 minutes earlier. She found herself believing him, or at least wanting to believe him. "Thank you," Victoria said. "I appreciate that." She hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry I called you heartless. That was harsh." Leonard waved off the apology. "You weren't wrong. I've been heartless for a long time. Maybe it's time I remembered how to be human." He stuck out his hand. "Leonard Briggs. I don't think I properly introduced myself. Victoria Hayes." She shook his hand. Her grip was still weak from the treatments, but she held on firmly enough. "Nice to meet you properly, Victoria Hayes. And I really am sorry for how I acted earlier. You deserved better than that." Leonard pulled out a business card and wrote a number on the back. "This is my cell phone. I'll call you as soon as I hear from my contact. If you don't hear from me by tomorrow afternoon, you call me and I'll give you an update either way. Deal?" "Deal." Victoria left the pawnshop feeling strangely lighter despite not having resolved anything. She had expected the worst and had gotten something close to the worst, but then something had shifted. The piano was still in Leonard's shop. She still did not have money for her treatments. But she had played again. For the first time in over a year, she had sat at a piano and created music. And in doing so, she had reminded herself that she was still Victoria Hayes. Still a musician. Still a teacher. Still someone with value beyond her medical bills in desperate circumstances. Cancer had taken so much from her, but it had not taken that. Not yet. The bus ride home took 40 minutes. Victoria sat in the back, watching the city roll past through dirty windows. She thought about her grandmother, dead now for 8 years but still present in every memory Victoria had of music. Her grandmother had been fierce and independent, a woman who had raised 3 children alone after her husband died young. She had supported her family by teaching piano lessons and performing at every venue that would have her. The piano had been her livelihood, but it had also been her joy. She had once told young Victoria that music was the only thing in life that could never be taken from you. Even if you lose everything else, even if you end up alone and broke, you still have the music inside you. Nobody can steal that. Victoria had not understood what her grandmother meant back then. She did now. Leonard Briggs could have offered her nothing. He could have kicked her out of his shop and told her the piano was worthless. But he could not take away what she had just done. The performance, however brief, however small the audience, had been real. She had made something beautiful in a place designed for desperation and loss. That mattered. Her phone rang as she got off the bus. She did not recognize the number and almost did not answer, assuming it was a bill collector or a robocall. But something made her answer anyway. "Is this Victoria Hayes?" The voice was male, older, with a warm quality that put her immediately at ease. "Yes, this is Victoria. Miss Hayes, my name is Robert Castellano. I'm a dealer in antique musical instruments. Leonard Briggs just called me about a 1961 Steinway upright you're looking to sell. I happened to be in town already for another appraisal, and Leonard sent me a video of you playing. I would very much like to come see the piano in person if you're willing. Would tomorrow morning work for you? Victoria's heart began to race. Tomorrow morning. That was fast. Almost suspiciously fast. Yes, tomorrow morning would be fine. What time? Would 10 o'clock work? I can meet you at Leonard's shop. 10 o'clock is perfect. Excellent. I'll see you then, Miss Hayes. And if I may say so, your playing was extraordinary. That piece is one of my favorites, and you did it justice even on a recording made with a cell phone in a pawn shop. I'm very much looking forward to meeting you. The call ended, and Victoria stood on the sidewalk staring at her phone in disbelief. This was happening. Someone was actually interested. A real dealer, not a pawn shop owner trying to squeeze maximum profit from desperate people. She allowed herself to feel a small spark of hope, though she tried to keep it contained. Hope was dangerous when you had been disappointed so many times. But it was also necessary. Without hope, there was no reason to keep fighting. That evening, Victoria sat at the small keyboard she kept in her apartment. It was a cheap digital model, nothing like the Steinway, but it was hers and it worked. She had not played it in months. Her fingers had been too weak, her concentration too scattered from the treatments. But tonight, she felt different. Stronger. More herself. She played through scales and simple exercises, feeling her muscles remember patterns they had performed thousands of times. Then she played Clair de Lune again, slower this time, paying attention to every note and phrase. The keyboard could not replicate the rich, complex sound of an acoustic piano, but it was enough. The music was there. That was what mattered. Her phone rang again around 8 o'clock. This time it was Leonard. Just wanted to let you know Robert called me back, Leonard said. He's coming tomorrow at 10. He seemed genuinely excited, which is a good sign. Robert doesn't get excited about instruments unless they're special. Thank you for arranging this so quickly, Victoria said. I really appreciate it. It's the least I could do after how I behaved. Leonard paused, then continued. I wanted to apologize again. I've been thinking about what you said, about hoping I never have to be desperate. Truth is, I have been desperate. Long time ago. I should have remembered what that felt like instead of making it worse for other people. We all do things we're not proud of when we're scared or angry, Victoria said. What matters is what we do after. You chose to help me. That counts for something. I hope Robert makes you a good offer tomorrow. You deserve it. And Victoria? If you ever get back to teaching, I'd like my granddaughter to take lessons. She's 7. I've been thinking maybe it's time someone in my family learned to appreciate music properly. Victoria smiled. I'd like that. Bring her by once I'm back on my feet. First lessons free. After the call ended, Victoria sat in the quiet of her small apartment feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Not quite happiness, but maybe something close to peace. The path forward was still difficult. The treatments would still be brutal. The money problems would not disappear overnight. But for the first time in months, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things might work out. Tomorrow she would meet Robert Castellano. Tomorrow she would find out what her grandmother's piano was really worth. Tomorrow might bring good news. And if it did not, well, she would face that too. She had faced everything else. She was still here. Still fighting. Still making music. That had to count for something. Victoria fell asleep that night with her hands resting on the keys of her cheap keyboard, and she dreamed of her grandmother playing in a concert hall filled with light. /artifact I've created the opening hook in part 1 of your original story following the 3-act structure from the analyzed inspirational video. The story introduces Victoria Hayes, a former music teacher facing cancer treatment costs, who encounters dismissive pawnshop owner Leonard Briggs. When he insults her in her grandmother's piano, she plays Claire de Lune, transforming the situation. The story is written in third-person perspective with completely original names, places, and details while maintaining the emotional framework of the source structure. I've reached approximately 8,000 words for this opening section. Victoria arrived at Riverside Pawn and Loan 15 minutes early the next morning. She had barely slept, her mind cycling through every possible outcome of the meeting with Robert Castellano. She wore her best outfit, a navy dress that had fit perfectly 2 years ago but now hung loose on her frame. The weight loss from treatment had been dramatic, stealing 30 pounds she could not afford to lose. But she had pressed the dress carefully, put on minimal makeup to hide the worst of the shadows under her eyes, and pulled her hair back in a neat bun. She wanted to look professional, capable, like someone who owned valuable things rather than someone desperate to sell them. Leonard was already inside when she arrived, moving the piano from its dusty corner to a more prominent position near the front windows. He had cleaned it too. The mahogany cabinet gleamed in the morning light, and he had polished the brass pedals until they shone. When he saw Victoria, he wiped his hands on his pants and walked over with something that might have been sheepishness on his face. Wanted it to look its best for Robert, Leonard explained. Figured it deserved better than being shoved behind old coats. He gestured toward a small card table he had set up nearby with 3 folding chairs. Thought we could sit there while Robert looks it over. I made coffee too, if you want some. Victoria accepted the coffee gratefully. Her hands were shaking slightly, though whether from nervousness or the medication she took every morning, she could not say. Leonard poured himself a cup as well and they sat in awkward silence, 2 people who had seen each other at their worst and were now trying to figure out how to move forward from that. I looked you up last night, Leonard said after a few minutes. Online. Found some articles about the high school where you taught. Your students won a bunch of competitions. State championships. Some of them got music scholarships to college. There was a whole article about how you built the orchestra program from nothing. Victoria felt her throat tighten. She had tried not to think too much about her teaching career, about the students she had left behind when she got sick. It hurt too much to remember what she had lost. That feels like a lifetime ago. Different person. Leonard shook his head. Same person. Just going through something hard. My ex-wife used to say that who you are doesn't change when things get difficult. It just becomes more visible. The real you comes out when you're under pressure. Before Victoria could respond, the brass bell above the door chimed. A man entered carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a tweed jacket that looked like it had come from another era. Robert Castellano was in his mid-60s with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of face that suggested he smiled often. He had the bearing of a professor or a curator, someone who spent his life around beautiful things and had learned to recognize quality. Victoria Hayes, Robert said, walking directly to her with his hand extended. Such a pleasure to meet you in person. And Leonard, thank you for calling me about this. He set his briefcase down and turned his full attention to the piano, approaching it the way someone might approach a painting in a museum. With reverence and careful attention. Robert spent the next 20 minutes examining the instrument in silence. He opened the lid and studied the strings, hammers, and dampers. He checked the soundboard for cracks, inspected the tuning pins, examined the action mechanism. He pressed keys individually, listening to the tone of each note. He looked at the cabinet from every angle, checking for damage or repairs. He even got down on his hands and knees to examine the legs and pedal mechanism. Throughout all of this, Victoria and Leonard waited quietly, barely breathing. Finally, Robert stood up, brushed off his pants, and turned to face them. His expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. May I ask about the piano's history? Where it was purchased originally, how it was maintained, any repairs or restoration work that's been done. Victoria opened her leather folder, relieved to finally have someone who actually wanted to see her documentation. My grandmother purchased it new in 1962 from Morrison Piano Company in Philadelphia. Here's the original bill of sale. She had it serviced annually by a certified Steinway technician until she passed away in 2017. After I inherited it, I continued the same service schedule until about 18 months ago when my circumstances changed. No major repairs have ever been needed. The action was regulated in 2015, and some of the felt was replaced on the hammers in 2012, but otherwise it's all original. Robert examined each document carefully, making occasional notes in a small notebook he pulled from his jacket pocket. "And you're the one who played it yesterday? The recording Leonard sent me?" "Yes. I'm a classically trained pianist. Was a music teacher for 18 years before I had to stop working due to illness." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Your playing was exceptional. Truly exceptional. The phrasing, the dynamics, the emotional interpretation. That was not the playing of an amateur or even just a competent professional. That was the playing of someone with real artistry." He paused, looking directly at Victoria. "Which tells me you would know if this piano had significant problems. You would hear it, feel it in the action. So when you played it yesterday, how did it feel to you?" Victoria considered the question carefully. "Honestly, it felt slightly stiff. The action needs adjustment. Some of the keys are sluggish. It's definitely out of tune, probably hasn't been serviced in over a year. But the fundamental quality is still there. The tone is still rich. The sustain is still good. It needs work, but it's not damaged. Just neglected." Robert smiled. "That's exactly what I found. This is a very fine instrument that needs some attention but has been well cared for most of its life. The cabinet is in excellent condition. The soundboard is perfect, no cracks or warping. The strings are original and still have good tension. The hammers need voicing and the action needs regulation, but those are routine maintenance issues. With proper restoration, this piano would be worth anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000 to the right buyer." Victoria felt dizzy. 12 to 15,000. That was more than she had hoped for. More than she had dared to dream. That would cover her next round of treatments with money left over. That would buy her time. However, Robert continued, and Victoria's heart sank. There was always a however. The restoration work would cost about $2,000, possibly more depending on what we find when we really get into the mechanism. And finding the right buyer could take months. The market for acoustic pianos is challenging right now. Most people want digital, as Leonard mentioned. The buyers who appreciate an instrument like this are collectors, serious musicians, institutions. They're out there, but they're not easy to find quickly. "So what are you saying?" Leonard asked. Victoria could hear the protective edge in his voice, which surprised her. "You can't help her?" Robert held up his hand. "I'm saying I can help, but we need to be realistic about timeline and price. If Ms. Hayes can wait 6 months, maybe a year, I can almost certainly get her $12,000 or more after restoration costs. But if she needs money quickly, that changes things." "I need money within 3 days," Victoria said quietly. "I have treatments scheduled. I have to pay up front or they won't begin. I don't have 6 months. I might not have 6 weeks." The words hung in the air. Robert's expression shifted from businesslike to compassionate. He took off his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt, buying himself a moment to think. "Miss Hayes, may I ask a personal question? What kind of treatments are we talking about?" "Experimental immunotherapy for breast cancer. Stage 3. The standard protocols failed. This is essentially my last option." Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he put his glasses back on and looked at the piano again. "I lost my wife to ovarian cancer 6 years ago. We tried everything. Conventional treatment, experimental drugs, clinical trials in different states. None of it worked. But we tried because that's what you do. You fight until you can't fight anymore." He turned back to Victoria. "So I understand what you're facing, and I understand why you need money now, not in 6 months." Leonard leaned forward in his chair. "So what can you do?" What's possible here? Robert pulled out his notebook and did some quick calculations. If I buy the piano as is, without restoration, and take on the risk of whether I can resell it, I can offer $7,000. That's less than it's worth, but it's fair given that I'm taking all the risk and expense of restoration. I can write you a check today. Right now. You could deposit it this afternoon. $7,000. Victoria did her math quickly. Her treatment cost $6,500. That would leave her with $500. Not much, but enough for medication and a few weeks of basic expenses. It was not the miracle she had hoped for, but it was enough to keep fighting. I'll take it, Victoria said immediately. Thank you. Thank you so much. Robert smiled. I thought you might say that. I brought my checkbook just in case. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a leather-bound check register. But before I write this, I want to make you an offer. A different kind of offer. Victoria and Leonard both looked at him with confusion. Robert settled back in his chair and folded his hands. I own a small music school about 2 hours from here. We focus on classical training for serious students. We have excellent facilities, 6 performance spaces, 20 practice rooms, and a collection of instruments that includes several concert grands, historic pianos, period instruments. We also have a small apartment on the property that we use for visiting artists and guest instructors. It's simple but comfortable. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, utilities included. What are you saying? Victoria asked, almost afraid to hope. I'm saying that we're always looking for qualified instructors, especially pianists with your credentials and ability. If you're interested, I would like to offer you a position. Part-time to start, given your health situation. You could teach private lessons, maybe coach some of our chamber groups. The apartment would be yours rent-free as part of the compensation. We're near a major medical center that specializes in oncology treatment. One of the best in the region, actually. My wife was treated there. Victoria felt tears start to roll down her cheeks before she could stop them. She had spent so long feeling like her life was over, like everything good had been stripped away by cancer. And now this stranger was offering her not just money but purpose. A reason to keep fighting. A place to heal and work and be useful again. I don't understand, Victoria said through her tears. Why would you do this? You don't know me. Robert's expression was gentle but firm. I know enough. I know you're a gifted musician. I know you dedicated your career to teaching young people. I know you're fighting for your life with courage and grace. And I know that my wife would have wanted me to help someone in your position if I had the chance. She always said that the only way to survive grief is to turn it into something good. So that's what I'm trying to do. Turn my grief into something that helps someone else. Leonard, who had been quiet during this exchange, cleared his throat roughly. That's real decent of you, Robert. Real decent. The practical details come together quickly. Robert wrote Victoria a check for $7,000 for the piano. Then he pulled out a contract for the teaching position, simple and straightforward. 20 hours a week, flexible schedule, apartment included, salary that was modest but livable especially with no rent. Victoria could start as soon as she was able, even if that meant waiting until after her treatments were complete. The position would be held for her. There's no pressure, Robert emphasized. If you start and realize it's too much, or if you need to take time off for medical reasons, we'll work with you. The most important thing is that you focus on getting well. The teaching is secondary to that. Victoria signed the contract with shaking hands. She felt like she was in a dream, the kind where everything works out impossibly well and you wake up disappointed. But this was real. The check in her hand was real. The contract was real. The possibility of a future beyond just surviving was real. After Robert left to arrange for movers to pick up the piano, Victoria and Leonard sat together in the quiet pawnshop. Leonard refilled their coffee cups and they drank in comfortable silence. Finally, Leonard spoke. I'm glad it worked out for you. Really glad. And I'm sorry again for yesterday. For how I treated you. Victoria looked at him with something close to affection. You know what's strange? If you hadn't been cruel yesterday, I never would have played. I came here planning to just take whatever you offered and leave. I was too tired to fight. But you made me angry enough to do something I wouldn't have done otherwise. And that led to all of this. Leonard considered that. So you're saying my being a jerk actually helped? I'm saying sometimes life is complicated and things work out in unexpected ways. You were still a jerk, though. Leonard laughed, a real laugh that transformed his face. Fair enough. I was definitely a jerk. Victoria stood to leave, but Leonard stopped her. One more thing. That offer about piano lessons for my granddaughter. Were you serious about that? Completely serious. Once I'm settled at Robert's school, bring her by. We'll set something up. She lives with her mother most of the time, but she's with me every other weekend. Her mom says she's too young for music lessons, but I think that's garbage. Kids are never too young to learn something beautiful. Victoria smiled. Bring her by. We'll prove her mother wrong. As Victoria walked out of Riverside Pawn and Loan for what she assumed would be the last time, she felt fundamentally different than when she had walked in the day before. She had come here desperate and defeated, willing to accept scraps. She was leaving with enough money for treatment, a job offer, a place to live, and something even more valuable. Hope. Real, tangible hope that her life was not over. That cancer had not taken everything. That there was still music to be made and students to teach and reasons to keep fighting. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Victoria deposited Robert's check and immediately paid the hospital for her upcoming treatments. She gave notice at her apartment, which was easy since she was month to month and her landlord was more than happy to have someone new who could actually pay rent on time. She packed her few possessions, which fit easily into a dozen boxes. 14 months of selling everything she owned to pay medical bills meant she traveled light now. The hardest part was saying goodbye to the few friends who had stuck with her through the illness. Cancer had a way of revealing who really cared about you. Some people Victoria thought were close friends had disappeared when she got sick, unable to handle the reality of serious illness. But others had surprised her with their loyalty. Her former teaching colleague Michelle came over to help pack and cried when Victoria told her about the job offer. I knew something good would happen for you, Michelle said, carefully wrapping Victoria's few remaining dishes in newspaper. You deserve this so much. You've been through hell. I don't know about deserving it, Victoria replied. I think I just got lucky. Right place, right time, right person seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself anymore. That's not luck. That's grace. There's a difference. Victoria thought about that word. Grace. Unearned favor. Gift without strings. She had spent so much of the past year feeling punished by the universe, cursed by random cellular mutations that tried to kill her. Maybe grace was just the other side of that coin. Random moments of unexpected kindness. Strangers who decided to help for no reason except that they could. The day before her treatment was scheduled to start, Victoria took the bus to Robert's music school. She wanted to see the place, meet the other instructors, and get the keys to her apartment before she got too sick from the immunotherapy to handle logistics. The school was located in a renovated church building from the 1890s, all stone walls and high ceilings and beautiful acoustics. Robert met her at the entrance and gave her a tour. The performance spaces were stunning. The main hall had a stage with a full-size concert grand piano, audience seating for 200, and stained glass windows that cast colored light across the floors. The practice rooms were soundproofed and each contained a good quality upright piano. The teaching studios were warm and inviting. And the apartment, small as it was, felt like a palace to Victoria after months of cramped efficiency living. It had big windows that let in natural light, a kitchen with room for a small table, and a bedroom just large enough for a bed and dresser. The other instructors welcomed her warmly. They seemed genuinely excited to have her join the faculty, and nobody treated her like a charity case or looked at her with pity when Robert quietly mentioned she was recovering from illness. They were professionals who understood that life was complicated and people dealt with hard things. What mattered was whether you could teach and whether you loved music. Victoria could do both. That evening, Victoria sat alone in her new apartment eating takeout Chinese food and looking out at the small courtyard behind the school. Students were coming and going, carrying instrument cases, chatting with each other, living their lives in that easy way young people do when they still believe they're invincible. Victoria envied them that innocence. She would never take her health for granted again. She would never assume there would always be time for the things that mattered. Cancer had stripped away that comfortable delusion. Her phone rang. It was Leonard. "Just wanted to check if you made it okay," he said. "Robert told me you were visiting the school today." "I'm here. It's beautiful. I can't believe this is real." "It's real. You earned it." He paused. "Listen, I wanted to tell you something. After you left the other day, I couldn't stop thinking about how I treated you. And about how I've been treating people in general for years. So I called my daughter. Haven't really talked to her in about 5 years. We had a falling out over some stupid family drama, and I was too proud to reach out. But watching you fight for your life made me realize how much time I've wasted being angry and bitter about things that don't matter." "How did the call go?" She answered, which I didn't expect. "We talked for 2 hours. Cried a lot. Made plans for her to bring my granddaughter to visit next weekend. So I guess what I'm saying is thank you. You didn't just change my mind about the piano. You changed my mind about a lot of things." Victoria felt fresh tears starting. She seemed to cry at everything lately, though her oncologist said that was normal with the hormone changes from treatment. "I'm glad, Leonard. Really glad. Family is important. Don't waste time on pride when you could be spending it with people you love. That's good advice. You take care of yourself, Victoria Hayes. Beat this thing. The world needs more teachers like you." After they hung up, Victoria sat in the darkness of her new apartment thinking about the strange chain of events that had led her here. If she had not gotten cancer, she would still be teaching at her old school, living in her old apartment, taking her health and her grandmother's piano for granted. If Leonard had not been cruel, she would not have played. If she had not played, Robert would never have known she existed. If Robert had not lost his wife, he might not have felt compelled to help a stranger. Every terrible thing and every beautiful thing was somehow connected, woven together into a pattern she could not have predicted or controlled. The next morning, Victoria checked into the hospital for the first round of immunotherapy. The treatment was brutal. They warned her it would be worse than chemotherapy in some ways, different in others. They were right. The nausea was crushing. Her fever spiked to dangerous levels. Her body ached like she had been beaten. The nurses were kind but clinical, doing their jobs efficiently while Victoria suffered through the prescribed 3 days of 4 medication that either would save her life or would not. On the second day, when the fever was at its worst and Victoria was seriously questioning whether she wanted to keep doing this, she got a text from Leonard. It was a photo of a little girl with dark curls sitting at a piano. His granddaughter. The message read, "Sophie says hi. Starting lessons next month. Says she wants to play like the lady in Grandpa's shop." Victoria stared at the photo through blurry, fever-bright eyes. That little girl was learning piano because Victoria had been brave enough to play in a pawn shop. Some student somewhere was going to benefit from lessons Victoria would teach once she was well enough to work again. Her grandmother's piano was going to end up with someone who appreciated it, who would make music on it, who would give it the life it deserved. None of that would have happened if Victoria had given up. None of it would have happened if she had accepted Leonard's first cruel offer and slunk away in defeat. She texted back, "Tell Sophie I can't wait to meet her. Tell her to practice every day. Tell her the piano is magic but only if you work hard enough to unlock it." Leonard responded immediately, "Will do. You hang in there. This is the hard part. Gets better on the other side." Victoria did not know if that was true. There were no guarantees with experimental treatment. It might work. It might not. She might have years ahead of her or only months. But she had learned something important through this whole ordeal. You keep fighting not because you're guaranteed to win, but because fighting itself has meaning. Because the act of trying, of refusing to surrender, of believing that tomorrow might be better than today, that was what made you human. That was what made life worth living even when everything was terrible. The treatment ended on day 3, and Victoria was released to recover. Robert had arranged for a visiting nurse to check on her for the first week. The woman, whose name was Patricia, was efficient and no-nonsense, exactly what Victoria needed. She made sure Victoria took her medications, ate enough, stayed hydrated. She changed bedding and tidied up and said things like, "You look terrible today but not as terrible as yesterday, so that's progress." Progress. Such a simple word for such a complicated process. Victoria's body was at war with itself, the immunotherapy essentially teaching her immune system to attack the cancer cells that had been growing unchecked. The side effects were miserable, but they meant the treatment was working. Or at least that's what everyone told her. It would take weeks to know for sure, months to know if it had really worked. In the meantime, she had to survive each day and trust that her body would heal. Michelle visited twice during that first week, bringing homemade soup and staying to watch terrible reality television with Victoria. They did not talk about cancer or treatment or what might happen. They just existed together in comfortable friendship, which was exactly what Victoria needed. On Michelle's second visit, she brought a gift. "I know you had to sell most of your music books," Michelle said, handing Victoria a cardboard box. "So I went through my collection and pulled out pieces I thought you might want. Some of it's pretty advanced, but I figured once you're feeling better you'll want things to work on." Victoria opened the box and found dozens of piano scores. Beethoven sonatas, Chopin nocturnes, Bach preludes, Debussy preludes. Some of the books were the same editions Victoria had owned and sold. Others were new to her. She ran her fingers over the covers, feeling the familiar weight and texture of sheet music. This was perhaps the most thoughtful gift anyone had given her in years. Not just the physical books, but what they represented. The assumption that Victoria would recover. That she would play again. That she had a future beyond just surviving. "Thank you," Victoria whispered. "This means everything." "You're going to need them," Michelle said firmly. "I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you teach hundreds of students. I've watched you build a program from nothing into something special. Cancer doesn't get to take that away from you. You're going to beat this, and when you do, you're going to make more music than ever before." Victoria wanted to believe that. Some days she did believe it. Other days, when the nausea was bad or the fever spiked or she looked in the mirror and saw how sick she looked, she wondered if everyone was just being kind by pretending she had a future. But those moments passed. She had learned to let them come and go like weather, not fighting them but not surrendering to them either. By the end of the second week, Victoria felt strong enough to leave the apartment. Robert had told her to take all the time she needed before starting work, but she was going crazy staring at the same 4 walls. She walked slowly to the main building of the music school and found her way to one of the practice rooms. It was empty, as she had hoped. Inside was an upright piano, nothing fancy but well-maintained and in tune. She sat down at the bench and rested her hands on the keys. She had not played since that day in the pawnshop. Her hands felt weak and stiff, her coordination affected by the treatment. She started with simple scales, working through muscle memory that existed somewhere deeper than conscious thought. C major, G major, D major. Up and down, finding the patterns. Her fingers remembered even if her mind felt foggy from medication and exhaustion. After warming up, she opened one of the books Michelle had brought. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was a piece her grandmother had loved, one Victoria had played countless times over the years. She started slowly, taking it phrase by phrase, not worrying about perfection or tempo or anything except making sound. The music was simple compared to what she used to be capable of, but it was music. It was proof that she was still Victoria Hayes, still a pianist, still capable of creating beauty even when her body was falling apart. She played for maybe 20 minutes before exhaustion forced her to stop. But those 20 minutes felt like victory. Like reclaiming part of herself that cancer had tried to steal. She sat at the piano, breathing hard, feeling simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. Then she heard applause from the doorway. Robert was standing there, smiling. "I was walking past and heard you playing. Didn't want to interrupt, but I didn't want to leave without telling you how wonderful that sounded." Victoria felt embarrassed. "I'm so out of practice. My technique is terrible right now." "Your technique is fine," Robert said gently. "But more importantly, your musicianship is still there. That's what matters. Technique can be rebuilt. But the ability to make music that moves people, that comes from somewhere else entirely. You still have it." Victoria felt tears again, those perpetual tears that seemed to always be close to the surface lately. "Thank you for this opportunity. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Robert walked into the room and sat down on the chair across from the piano. "Can I tell you something? When Leonard sent me that video of you playing in his shop, I watched it maybe 20 times. I couldn't figure out what it was about your playing that affected me so deeply. Then I realized it was because you were playing like someone who had nothing left to lose. Like every note mattered because it might be your last chance to make music. That kind of playing is rare. It's honest in a way most people never achieve." Victoria thought about that. Maybe that was true. Maybe facing mortality had stripped away all the pretense and performance anxiety and desire to impress that used to clutter up her playing. Maybe when you were fighting for your life, you stopped caring about being perfect and just focused on being real. "I want you to know there's no pressure here," Robert continued. "Teach when you're ready. Take months to recover if you need to. But also know that we want you here not as a charity case but as a valued member of our faculty. You have gifts our students need. You have perspective most teachers never develop. You've been through something that makes you understand what really matters. That's going to make you extraordinary at this job." Over the next few weeks, Victoria slowly increased her time at the piano. 30 minutes one day, 45 the next. An hour when she felt strong. She worked through the books Michelle had given her, relearning pieces she used to know by heart. Her technique gradually improved. Her stamina increased. And most importantly, her love of music, which had been buried under months of just trying to survive, came roaring back to life. 6 weeks after starting treatment, Victoria had her first follow-up scan. The waiting room at the oncology center was full of people like her, warriors fighting invisible battles. Some looked healthy and strong. Others looked like they were barely hanging on. Victoria wondered which category she fit into. She felt stronger than she had in months, but she also knew that feeling better did not necessarily mean the cancer was gone. The immunotherapy could fail. The tumors could be growing even as her symptoms improved. There were no guarantees. The scan itself was routine, just another medical procedure in an endless series of medical procedures. Victoria lay still in the machine and tried not to think about what the images might show. Afterward, she had to wait 3 days for results. 3 days of trying not to imagine the worst. 3 days of going through the motions of living while her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Robert found her in a practice room on the second day of waiting. He knocked gently on the door frame and poked his head in. "How are you holding up?" "I'm terrified," Victoria admitted. "I don't know what I'll do if the scan shows the treatment didn't work." Robert came in and sat down. "You'll do what you've been doing. You'll keep fighting. One day at a time. One treatment at a time. Until either you beat this thing or you run out of options. And if you run out of options, you'll have the peace of knowing you fought with everything you had. It's exhausting being brave all the time." "Then don't be brave all the time," Robert said. "Be scared when you're scared. Be angry when you're angry. Be sad when you're sad. Nobody expects you to be strong every minute of every day. That's not how humans work." Victoria appreciated his honesty. So many people wanted her to be inspirational, to talk about her journey and her strength and her positive attitude. But sometimes she just wanted to be a regular person who was terrified and exhausted and unsure if any of this was worth it. The call came on the third day. Victoria was in her apartment trying to eat lunch when her phone rang with the oncology center's number. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the phone trying to answer it. "Ms. Hayes, this is Dr. Morrison. I have your scan results. The tumors have shrunk significantly. 2 of the smaller ones appear to be completely gone. The larger ones are about 60% reduced in size. This is an excellent response to the immunotherapy. Better than we typically see at this stage." Victoria could not speak. She just stood there holding the phone, trying to process words that felt too good to be true. "I want to continue the treatment protocol," Dr. Morrison continued. "Another round in 4 weeks, then we'll scan again. But this is very encouraging, Victoria. This is real progress." After the call ended, Victoria sat down on her couch and cried. Not sad tears this time, but relief so profound it felt like her body might shake apart. The treatment was working. She was not cured, not yet, maybe not ever. But she was not dying right now. She had bought herself more time. Time to teach. Time to play. Time to rebuild a life that felt like it had been destroyed. She called Leonard. "I don't know why you're the person I wanted to tell first, but you are. The treatment worked. The tumors are shrinking." Leonard's voice was thick with emotion. "That's wonderful, Victoria. That's the best news I've heard in a long time. How's Sophie doing with her piano lessons?" "She's driving her mother crazy, practicing every day. Turns out she's pretty talented. Her teacher says she's never seen a 7-year-old pick things up so quickly." Leonard paused. "Where are you going to be ready to take on students?" "Sophie keeps asking when she can meet the lady from Grandpa's shop." "Tell her soon. Tell her very soon." Victoria hung up and immediately called Robert. He answered on the first ring, and she could hear the hope in his voice when he said her name. She told him about the scan results, about the shrinking tumors, about having more time. "I knew it," Robert said quietly. "I knew you'd beat this thing. You're too stubborn to let cancer win." "I want to start teaching," Victoria said. "Next week, if that's possible. Maybe just a couple of students to start, but I need to feel useful. I need to do something besides wait for the next scan." "I have the perfect students for you," Robert said. 2 sisters, ages 13 and 15. Both very talented, both very serious about music. Their current teacher is moving out of state next month, and they need someone new. I think you'll love them." And so Victoria Hayes, former high school music teacher, cancer survivor in progress, began the next chapter of her life. She taught her first lesson the following week, working with the 2 sisters Robert had mentioned. They were indeed talented and serious, hungry to improve, respectful of her knowledge. Teaching them felt like coming home to herself. This was who she was, who she had always been. Not a patient. Not a victim. Not someone defined by illness. A teacher. A musician. Someone who helped others find beauty in sound. Word spread quickly among the parents at Robert's school. The new teacher was exceptional. Patient but demanding. Technically skilled but focused on artistry. The woman who had survived cancer and come back to teach. Within a month, Victoria had 8 students. Within 2 months, 15. She had to start turning people away, limiting her schedule to what her recovering body could handle. Leonard brought Sophie for her first lesson on a Saturday morning in early autumn. The little girl was shy at first, hiding behind her grandfather's legs. But when she saw the piano, her eyes lit up with the same wonder Victoria had felt as a child. Sophie climbed onto the bench and carefully placed her small hands on the keys, treating the instrument with reverence. "Grandpa says you make magic with the piano," Sophie said seriously. "Can you teach me magic too?" Victoria smiled. "I can teach you music." And if you work very hard and practice every day, someday it will feel like magic. But magic takes time. It takes patience. Are you willing to work hard even when it's difficult? Sophie nodded solemnly. I'm ready to work hard. And she did. Sophie turned out to be one of those rare students who had both talent and dedication. She practiced daily without being nagged. She absorbed corrections and applied them immediately. She loved music the way Victoria had loved it as a child, with pure, uncomplicated joy. Teaching Sophie became one of the highlights of Victoria's week. The months passed in a rhythm of teaching, practicing, treatment, and recovery. Victoria had 2 more rounds of immunotherapy, each one as brutal as the first but each one effective. The tumors continued to shrink. Her blood work showed improvement. Dr. Morrison used words like remission and cautiously optimistic. Victoria learned not to think too far ahead, to celebrate each good scan without assuming the next one would be the same. She lived in 3-month increments, from one scan to the next, finding joy in the present instead of worrying about the future. A year after walking into Leonard's pawnshop, Victoria performed in public for the first time since getting sick. Robert's school hosted an annual faculty recital, and he convinced Victoria to participate. She was terrified, convinced she would forget the music or her hands would shake or people would see how weak she still was. But when the evening came and she walked onto the stage of the school's main hall, something shifted. The audience of students and parents and colleagues stopped being judges and became fellow humans who wanted to hear beauty. Victoria sat at the concert grand, took a breath, and began to play. She performed 3 pieces that night. The Chopin Nocturne that had been her first attempt at playing after treatment. A Bach prelude that her grandmother had loved finally, Clair de Lune. The piece that had changed everything. As the final notes faded, the audience rose in standing ovation. Victoria stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. She had survived. She had returned. She was making music again. 2 years later, Victoria received a letter. The immunotherapy had worked. Complete remission. Dr. Morrison used the word cure cautiously, but the scans were clear. Sophie performed her first recital that same week, playing flawlessly. Leonard sat in the front row, weeping with pride. After the performance, Sophie hugged Victoria tightly and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me magic." Victoria thought about her grandmother's piano, now owned by a young concert pianist who performed on it regularly. The instrument had found its purpose. So had Victoria. Sometimes losing everything teaches you what truly matters. Music. Teaching. Connection. Love. These things could not be pawned or sold. They lived inside you, waiting to be shared. Victoria had almost forgotten that. But standing in a pawnshop a lifetime ago, she had remembered. And remembering had saved her life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.